Hi, this is Ned Steinberger. I'm speaking with you from my workshop here in Nobleboro, Maine, to answer questions that were posed to me by the good folks at Bass Musician Magazine. I have a list of questions here, and I'm just going to read the questions and do my best to answer them. First question is, how did you get your start in music? Are you still an active player? This assumes, of course, that I am a musician, which is not true. I have never been a musician except when I was in elementary school. I did play the flute for a while, which I actually enjoyed, but it became pretty clear that my talents lay elsewhere. So I've taken up a different career than music, but it's related to music sort of by chance. I compare myself in a way to a singer-songwriter in that I'm a designer, inventor. It's kind of the flip side, and of course, you know, the work that I do involves musical instruments. I get to make instruments for musicians. I get to support music through that process, make tools that artists use to entertain me and give meaning to my life and to many others. So it's a great privilege to do the work that I do. Let's see, on to the next set of questions here. How did you get started as a luthier? When did you build your first bass? How did you learn the art of woodworking and luthiery? And who would you consider to be a mentor? Well, I started with woodworking when I was really very young, age 12 or so, and continued to be a pretty serious woodworker really through my young years, through junior high school and high school. I was fortunate that my father had a small workshop in our basement. I lived in a suburban community with a little bit of space. He had some very rudimentary hand tools, but took pleasure in using them now and then for projects, and I was very interested to learn when I had the opportunity. I lived in a kind of out-of-the-way neighborhood. I didn't have a lot of friends in the neighborhood, so I was on my own a lot, and making things just really appealed to me. So I took those basic skills that I learned early on and built on those. Bought more equipment I took all my little savings that I could get and mow the lawn and bring the money home and go down and buy a new drill bit or something like that to do a job that I was working on. And I always designed all my own stuff. I think that's kind of unusual, but in a way, it was just lazy. I didn't want to look up what I was going to do. I just did my own thing. But that was good training for me. I learned how structures are put together, how to come up with ideas to make things work. I designed and built mostly furniture for around the house and projects for my mother was an artist. I built her a really nice easel, actually, way back then. I even built a music stand for myself because I was still at that time playing the flute a little bit. So maybe that was something that was telling me about my future, what I really wanted to do when I grew up. But I didn't really have any idea that this was a career-oriented kind of thing. It was just what I liked to do. It's what gave me satisfaction, and I just loved the process. Loved seeing these projects come together and become real. I went to college, didn't really fit in very well at college, didn't do very well at college, ended up going to art school. Eventually, I ended up doing cabinet making. I was in New York City, in Brooklyn, New York, working for a guy who taught me a great deal about woodworking, took it to a whole nother level for me. But eventually I ended up on my own in a little place called the Brooklyn Woodworking Co-op. And during this time, I was pursuing furniture design pretty seriously, and I worked for a year in York, Pennsylvania for the Thone Furniture Company designing seating, and had the skills to be able to actually craft the prototypes for production. That was a very important phase for me. I learned a tremendous amount. But ended up in Brooklyn at the Brooklyn Woodworkers Co-op. And by some great luck, Stuart Spector was part of that co-op. Stuart Spector was making guitars primarily at the time. Circumstances led me to offer to design a bass for Stuart because he needed a bass in his line of instruments. And so Stuart was definitely my mentor. I learned everything at that time from Stuart. Of course, I've gone on to learn a few things on my own as well, but he's the one who gave me my start. Very fortunate to have his support and his teaching at the beginning of my career. So one thing led to another, and it became really the focus of my work life, building instruments. I don't consider myself a luthier in the traditional sense, in that I think of a luthier as more someone building an instrument by hand, something really very special, handmade kind of a thing. Of course, my focus is on designing instruments that can be made in a factory environment. So it's a little bit different, but still not that different, really. So, on to the next question here. How do you select the woods you choose to build with? Well, that's an interesting question for someone who's known especially for instruments that are not made out of wood at all. And how did that happen? When I first started making instruments, I took a lot just as it was. Instruments are made with maple necks. Electric guitars and electric bass guitars have maple necks, and ebony or rosewood fingerboards, maybe a maple fingerboard. Bodies are generally made out of a lighter wood, maybe alder. We used at the beginning. We used walnut quite a bit, Stuart and I. But what happened was, I was approaching the instrument primarily from an ergonomic point of view. Again, I took the sonic qualities as a given. What did I know about it? I didn't really know much at that point. I've learned a lot since, but at the beginning, this was just how it was done, and I figured that was the way to do it. So, using conventional wood, maple for the neck and so on, that's how I started out. And I designed this instrument for Stuart. In the process of creating this design and trying to make an instrument that was ergonomically optimized, I came up across the age-old issue with an electric bass guitar, which is that it's got a really long neck and it's got heavy tuning machines at the end of the neck, and it's got a weight problem. It's neck heavy. So neck heavy, that was a real issue for me, because I was trying to optimize the ergonomics, make it the most comfortable instrument possible to play. It was my focus. So here I have a situation where sort of an unsolvable problem. The damn thing was neck heavy no matter what I did. I even put a weight at the opposite end of the body, the very end of the body, inside the body where you would never see it. I put a lead weight. And that helped, but still didn't really fully compensate for the heavy neck, the heavy tuning machines at the end of the neck, because the neck is so long and it's cantilevered out there. So I was confronted with this fundamental issue until one day I was just sort of struggling with that and thinking, what's the solution to this problem? And it occurred to me, move the heavy tuning machines that are on the end of the neck onto the opposite side of the instrument, put them on the body, weight problem solved. Lots of other problems were created at the same time, unfortunately, or fortunately, because I like solving problems. I like a challenge. So this became a big focus for me. I thought, geez, this is a great approach. This is a way to make the instrument really balanced. How can I make that instrument perform in all ways, not just be balanced, but be a beautiful instrument to play, have great tone, great feel, and all the things that are important for a musician in their instrument. So I headed off down that road and made a lot of mistakes on the way, took roads the wrong direction, had to come back and start again. I started with a very lightweight, a super lightweight instrument. I had some idea about how that was going to be a great sounding instrument. It's a very flexible neck. It sounded terrible. I just mean bad. It was very inconsistent note to note. It had all kinds of dead spots in it, and very little sustain, and it's just the exact opposite of what I was trying to achieve. That was very discouraging. I put the project on hold for a while just because I was just so let down by my initial failure. But the interesting thing about failure is that it is the way that you learn. You make mistakes, you learn from your mistakes. Eventually I started to come back to the project because I still believed in the concept. So I did some experiments, actually. I took this very lightweight, flexible instrument and I added a lot of weight to it. What's the weight going to do for this instrument? So I put a lot of weight on it without really affecting the structure very much. I put a lot of C-clamps, heavy C-clamps. Wherever I could get them on there, I'd get on, so I could still play the strings, but the thing weighed a lot, maybe like 25 pounds or something like that. Not a practical instrument to play, but again, as an attempt to understand how the thing worked and how to make it into what I wanted it to be. And I found that the added weight made a big difference. It stabilized the instrument in terms of its inconsistency note to note. It much more sustained, much more satisfying tonality. So I thought, well, that's good. But what is the role of rigidity in this? I mean, it's okay, now I've made it heavier, but what if I made it stiffer? So using those same C-clamps, I essentially set the thing up so I could clamp it to the workbench I had at the time was an old style, super heavy workbench, very, 4-inch thick maple type of thing. So I clamped this wimpy bass onto the workbench, and the result from that was really spectacular. No dead spots, super sustain, brilliance of tone, clean, bright, deep, pretty much everything I was looking for that I wanted to provide to musicians. That's what led me to carbon fiber, because I began to see that stiffness was the key element to creating a really brilliant sustained sound. The weight was important, but not as important as rigidity. And the reason for that is pretty easy to understand. If you have a flexible structure, it can be heavy in one place or another, but if you're trying to, and the idea is to hold the ends of the string such that the string is free to vibrate without interacting unduly with the structure that's holding it. So if you stretch a string across a rubbery structure, it's just going to go like a rubber band, just have no capacity to retain energy. When you pluck that string, that's all the energy that string has got. It's not like bowing it. It's different. You pluck it, that's it. So if the structure that is holding that string interacts too much with the string, then the string, it sucks all the energy out of the string and it dies, basically, is what happens. So making something rigid means that you can't create an interaction locally, or you know, if the string is connected to 2 points, if the instrument is very flexible, then those points can vibrate independent of the rest of the instrument because it's flexible. So those going like crazy with the string and the energy's gone. But if you have a limit, and of course with an instrument, you can't play an instrument that weighs 25 pounds. You've got to be a comfortable weight. So given the limit of the weight that you can carry comfortably, if you want to have sustain and brilliance and consistency note to note, you want it to be really stiff. And of course, a lot of the woods that are used in luthiery have very high stiffness to weight ratios. That's a key element in wooden instrument construction. But carbon fiber, I think of carbon fiber as super wood. It's fibrous. It's, you know, got a direction to the structure. It's got kind of a glue that holds the fiber together, just the same way that the resin in a wood holds it all together. Those fibers in relation to each other. So looking towards the future, trying to imagine what an instrument could be, when I learned about the possibilities with carbon fiber, with the structural properties of carbon fiber, which are incredible stiffness to weight ratio. Just that's why I call it superwood, because it is on a whole nother level. So those are the materials that I began to experiment with, and I found that I got extremely good results. It was not so easy to figure it all out, and in those days too, these materials were much less widely available. Carbon fiber was really an aerospace material, extremely expensive, and had really been used in a very limited way for consumer products, like a musical instrument. But I was able to manage, I was able to get a hold of some of these materials and learn how to work with it, and built instruments from it with really spectacular results. So I do use wood today quite a bit. I use carbon fiber as well. The one thing about carbon fiber, of course, it's never going to be as beautiful as a piece of wood. It's never going to feel the same way a piece of wood feels. People love wood. I love wood. I mean, it's what I started working with when I was just a kid. So kind of combining carbon fiber and wood in creative ways to deliver high performance and at the same time have an aesthetic feel to it. That's what I've been doing for the last 40 years. Okay, on to the next question. How about pickups? What pickups did you use in the past? What electronics do you use right now? It's an interesting little bit of history there. When we started making Steinberger basses, we were in the New York area. We had an excellent pickup company on Staten Island, DiMarzio Company. Made great pickups. Of course, they were known primarily for guitar pickups, not so much for bass. But we got pickups from DiMarzio, which were high impedance pickups. It was, you know, passive, conventional kind of construction. But I had seen in Guitar Player magazine or something like that these ads from EMG for a new technology in pickups, low impedance pickups. And also I happened to have visited with Les Paul around that time. I managed to meet him through my good friend Hap Kuffner. We went out to visit Les, and he was going on and on about low impedance pickups. So, and I'm not an electronics guy, I'm a mechanic basically. structures, geometry. This is what I'm all about. But I wanted to use the latest and the greatest technology without a doubt. And when I saw these ads from EMG for low impedance active pickups, I thought, geez, well, I really want to check that out. So I got some of those in and used them on our first runs of Steinberger basses. We used DiMarzios and EMGs. That was an H1 and H2 for high impedance, single or double pickup, and L1 and L2 for our low impedance instruments. Bassists really were attracted to the low impedance sound. You know, guitar players is another ball game, and of course passive pickups remain very, very popular with guitar players, but bass players looking for that extended harmonic range, really clean sound. They're not running it through an amp and putting a lot of distortion on it. They want that clean, wide frequency response, all the good stuff you get from low impedance active pickups. So that's why if you look back, you won't really see many H1s or H2s around, because people just went for the low impedance, and that's what we ended up going with. So and I still use EMG pickups a great deal, and have a long relationship with the EMG company, with Rob Turner, and it's been a really great opportunity for me and for the products for musicians. But there's a whole other side of pickups, which are piezo pickups. I got to know piezo pickups very well because you know, I started out with the Steinberger Sound Company, sold that to Gibson in 1987, worked with Gibson for a while, and eventually went out on my own again. At that time, I became very interested in electric upright bass. What was so exciting then, and still is exciting for me now, is that the longer the string you have for a bass, the better, really. I don't think there's really any other way of looking at it, at least for me, because the longer the string, the thinner the string can be and still maintain tension, the brighter the sound, the more harmonic structure you have. It's easy to get a lot of bass. There's nothing to get a fat, deep bass sound is easy, but to get a tight, clean bass sound with harmonics that can cut, that's the challenge. If you look at a piano has got, you know, a grand piano is 13 feet long. And why is it 13 feet long? It's just for the bottom half dozen strings. That's all, because you do the math, you do the calculation on what would be the ideal length of the string, and it gets really long. So the upright bass was an exciting challenge and an exciting opportunity to create new sounds, take an electric instrument to a different place, because the focus on the upright bass is on acoustic bass, which is great. I love acoustic basses. But what could you do with an electric upright? That was the exciting prospect, something I've certainly worked on for a long time. When I started out, of course, as I always do as a non-player, my first task is to get input from musicians. The musicians were pretty consistent in telling me that the electric upright bass should be as much like an acoustic upright as possible, which I can understand, but of course it's never been the way I've approached electric instruments. I've always wanted to find what an electric instrument could be, rather than just try to copy or imitate an acoustic instrument as closely as possible. The second thing that bass players told me, bass players who had some experience with electric upright bass, said, you know, you're never going to get a bowed sound out of it. It just doesn't happen with an electric instrument, so I wouldn't really bother with that. I just make it for pits. I didn't really find that a very exciting prospect either. I wanted to go the whole 9 yards. I didn't want it to be like an acoustic instrument, but I didn't want to leave out a whole dimension of sound and technique that are part of an of an acoustic double bass. So naturally, I wanted to figure out how to get a great bowed sound as well as a great pitch sound. That's where piezo comes in. It's not to get too technical here particularly, but still, it's interesting to note that magnetic pickups do not do well on a bowed instrument. The reason for that is that when you're bowing an instrument, you're driving that string sideways, and magnetic pickups are sensitive up and down, similar to the way an acoustic guitar works. Acoustic guitars are sensitive up and down, but acoustic upright basses are specially designed, and also violins, cellos, violas are all designed with tall bridges, and they're designed to respond to side-to-side vibrations that are created by the bow. In comes piezo, because you can configure piezos to be sensitive in any direction you want if you know what you're doing. And it certainly took me quite a while to figure out what I was doing. But eventually I began to really understand how you could use a piezo to create sensitivity in whatever direction you want. In fact, now our instruments are generally set up with what we call a polar pickup. It's our own trademark. It's a pickup that you can actually select the sensitivity so that you can have a great bowed sound and a great pitch sound, and sort of move between them in ways that give musicians more creative opportunity. So piezos are our own piezo, developed by me, just experimenting in my little shop. Just nothing extravagant. Just trying one thing, trying another, until it finally starts to come together and begin to understand how it works and get a good result. So piezo pickups are very important, and the new radius bass that we're making from NS, that NS Design is offering, of course, has EMG magnetic pickups and piezo pickups that we've developed on our own. Gives an amazing range of tone. People think of piezo pickups as being very bright and lacking in low end, which was true for a long time with the various kinds of pickup designs that were available. But the fact is that a piezo pickup is incredibly flat response, or piezo crystal. So it goes right down to a couple cycles a second, flat as a board, up to hundreds of thousands of cycles per second, way, way, way beyond the human range of hearing at both ends. So, and that has been part of the reason why piezos have been less popular, I'd say. In fact, a lot of people don't like the idea of a piezo. And that has to do with the fact that an acoustic instrument is not capable of responding to very low frequencies or very high frequencies. It's got a mid-range response, and it's very pleasing. People love the sound of acoustic instruments. You get a piezo in there, and if you just sort of, if you don't control it, if you don't know how to use it well, it'll give you sounds that are harsh and not what people are looking for. But the potential of the piezo, because it can do everything if you know how to control it, it means that there's just a lot of possibilities there that are really not possible with a magnetic pickup. So the combination of the two, that's what I believe in, and a lot of players are enjoying the the wide sound palette that you can get by having both those kinds of pickups on your instrument. Okay, next question. Who were some of the first well-known musicians who started playing your basses? Well, I guess a lot of great musicians have played Steinberger basses and NS design basses over the years. The guy who's, I guess, closest to my heart, because he was the number one guy that asked the question about the first musicians. I was very lucky to be introduced to Tony Levin very early on in my career. I had just built one of the first Steinberger basses ever. It was a fretless instrument, and these instruments took me forever to make. They're all handmade. Huge effort, no real guarantee that anybody would be interested. They were so strange. They had no headstock. They were made out of plastic. A lot of people thought I was completely out of my mind. But as I say, I had this opportunity to meet Tony Levin. He was in a recording studio, and he was having difficulty. He had a Fender fretless bass there that he was trying to record with, but as so often the case is with wooden instruments, even though a Fender obviously is a fabulous instrument, and Leo Fender is one of my heroes, but this thing wasn't working well, and he was frustrated. So I came up, I got lucky, really lucky. I had this instrument, I handed it to Tony, and he played a little bit, and it was a great sounding instrument, it really was. He just went, yeah, I think so, I want to buy it, he said. Okay, that was fine with me. I didn't even really understand how great a player Tony was at that point. But anyway, he was the first. He also, then when after I started making upright electrics, he was also the first there to, although I should qualify that because Rob Wasserman was a big inspiration, and I made instruments for him actually before I made anything for Tony. But still, Tony was very early on with the uprights too, so he's been a long-time supporter, and it continues today. So that's really, Tony's the guy who got me kind of on the map. But other players, Andy West early on was very important because of the Dixie Dregs. We went out to this NAMM show in 1980, I think it was. We had a couple, maybe a half a dozen basses there in a little 10 by 10 booth. No clue really what we were doing, just trying to present these to the public. And for the most part, people would walk by and kind of laugh and about what we were doing. It was so strange looking, plastic headless bass. We were not doing very well, and I was getting pretty uptight about the fact that people seemed not to take us very seriously. But we got lucky because there was a big show at this event a couple days into it with the Dixie Dregs, and Andy West, God bless him, he had found one of these instruments in New York City on 48th Street, the big center for musical instruments in those days. He bought himself that Steinberger bass, took it up on stage for this huge show, and proceeded to just absolutely blow everybody's mind that he's such a great player. And of course, the truth is, my business is musical instruments, but it's not the instrument, it's the player, honestly. So if you have make a good tool, then that's going to enhance the work that the craftsperson, or the musician in this case, can do with a better tool. You can get a better result. But especially when it comes to music, if you're a great player, you'll make anything sound great. And certainly Andy, he was a showstopper. The next day our booth was mobbed, and really, we were. That was the beginning. And it never stopped. People continued to appreciate these instruments and go take them to new places. Sting, Geddy Lee, just a huge list of players who picked up on these instruments. And it was players who showed other players what the instruments could do and showed the general public. So my indebtedness to Andy and all the players who have taken my instruments out on stage and shown the world what could be done with them, that's something, of course, I'm extremely grateful for, and is what has made my work over the long haul possible. Okay, next question. How do you develop a signature or custom bass for an artist? Well, I don't know how you do that. I've never done it. I've customized my instruments for artists. I remember Bill Wyman of the Rolling Stones wanted a 32-inch scale. Now, to be perfectly honest, if some unknown musician had come up and said he wanted a 32-inch scale, I would have said, yeah, that's a great, that's fine, but I can't do it. It's just, we make a certain kind of instrument, and if you find it to be to your liking, then that's great. We'll do everything we can to make it the best it can be. But if you want something really different, then there's people out there who can do custom work for you. But we're really about developing these instruments in the form that is in the essential form that we're offering. But when Bill Wyman of the Rolling Stones shows up and wants a custom instrument that he wants to take out on stage with the Rolling Stones, that's a different matter. So we built him a 32-inch scale bass. So we have done some kinds of customization of that sort, and also for lesser known musicians. In particular, if an artist comes to us with a request for something that I think is really interesting and might be of interest not just to this individual, but to have a wider appeal, and where I might learn something from the process of making a custom instrument, I certainly have done it over the years, but custom instruments are not really my thing. I'm more about trying to imagine what an instrument could be, putting it together, putting it out there for people to try, and then if they like it, that's great. Or maybe they don't like it and I learn something about what I'm doing and change it. But once I've got it going, then and of course I'm not building individual instruments. These instruments are designed to be built in a factory environment in more quantity. So it's a different thing than being a luthier. Okay, moving on. What are a few things that you are proud about your instruments and that you would consider unique in your instruments? Certainly the headless concept is unique. It's not unique anymore, actually. There's quite a few headless instruments available out there, but initially it was quite unique. I guess in terms of what I'm proud of in my work, I believe that the instruments I design have a kind of integrity to them that there's every attempt is made to have a concept and to be true to that concept and follow it through to the end. I had a teacher in art school many years ago, a guy by the name of Ron Groh. I've tried to find him over the years because I learned so much from him. I never could find him, but anyway, that's another story. He said to me, Ned, this is all right, but you haven't taken it all the way. Did you really take this concept you're working on as far as you could go with it, or did you kind of go halfway and then think and say you're done? So that's always been in my mind ever since, and I always try to take it all the way. Take a concept and try to understand it, experiment with it, push it as far as I can. And I'm proud of that I have been able to do that on occasion anyway, to take something and take it all the way. It depends on what you're doing too. For example, when I was designing a Steinberger bass, first of all, I really had virtually no real understanding of the commercial world of musical instruments. I was kind of in my own little world. And I was trying to imagine, what would be the instrument of the future? What could it be? What would it look like? How would it feel? What would it be made out of? And how would it be different? How would it be better? So that's what drove everything I did with that first project with the Steinberger bass. I didn't pay any attention to what musicians were playing or liked or didn't like, or what they were used to, or any of that stuff. I just was trying to take this concept all the way. Today, the bass that I'm wrapped up mostly now with is a radius bass guitar, aside from the upright basses, which are another thing again. But with the bass guitar, the headless bass guitar, the radius bass is the NS radius bass is about trying to package the benefits of headless design, the kind of piezo that I know how to make after all these years of working with a piezo, and of course, excellent pickup from EMG. Taking these features that I think have real value for musicians and packaging them into an instrument that is not so radical, which is more in the pocket, more in the comfort zone for musicians, so that more musicians will avail themselves of the benefits of the features of the instrument, rather than creating an instrument that may be more radical and might be a little more than most bassists are really ready to embrace. So I'm trying to take that concept all the way and make it as comfortable as possible, with the radius on the body, the balance, the weight, the electronics, the structure of the neck, all this, trying to make it the very highest performance instrument I can in a package that's in the comfort zone. So I don't know if I've answered that question or not, but I guess time to move on. Which one of the basses that you build is your favorite one? Well, that's an interesting question. I guess I tend to see the basses that I've designed as my children, and that sounds kind of corny, but it's how I feel about them. And I don't think it's ever a good idea to love one child more than another. So I wouldn't really want to pick and choose among the instruments I've designed as to which is my favorite. Certainly the Steinberger bass is the one that launched my career primarily, and it's always been a challenge to meet that level. When you're young, you're ready to try anything, and you get older, you get a little bit more conservative. But I still try to keep that energy going and keep producing instruments that are advanced over the last one. But sometimes that's not so easy to do. All right. What is the biggest success for you and for your company? I've never been all that successful as a businessman, to be perfectly frank, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that my heart and soul is not so much into business, but it's into instruments and design and creating instruments of quality. hiring people and doing marketing and dealing with sales and finance. These are not my favorite things in the world. So, biggest success for me is having great musicians play the instruments, make great music. You know, Sting, Tony Levin, Geddy Lee, and of course, you know, we made a lot of guitars. I've made a lot of guitars over the years. Van Halen, all kinds of great musicians have used my instruments, and that is certainly the greatest success, and it's a wonderful thing, so I'm very grateful. Are you preparing something new, some new model or new design, or maybe some new gear, amps, etc.? Well, I'm always working on new stuff. That's my game. That's what I enjoy. As far as basses go, some time ago I developed something called a boomerang strap system that you can use on, that was designed really for the Omni bass. Omni bass is an upright bass with a 34-inch scale, so it's designed to be an extremely versatile instrument. That's why we call it the Omni, because it sort of does it all. You can bow it, you can pluck it. It's a 34-inch scale, so it's accessible to, much more accessible to a bass guitar player, and of course most bassists are bass guitar players. So the idea of the Omni bass was to make something that would open up doors for bass guitarists primarily. You have a whole new direction, be able to get bowed sounds and that sort of thing. In order to get that instrument to be an instrument that you could wear, that's another thing about the Omni, is you can wear it. You don't have to have an end pin stand or have it on the floor. I mean, you can run around the stage, do it, whatever you want to do. It's like a bass guitar in that sense, the strap over the shoulder. In order to do that, I developed something we call the boomerang strap system, which allows the instrument to be put in virtually any attitude that you want it to have. You can not only set the angle of the neck from vertical to horizontal, but you can also set the angle of the fingerboard in relation to your body and in relation to the bow. It's just you put the instrument where you want it and it stays there. So that's a really great product. People really enjoy it. It's adds another dimension to how you can play. I am in the process of developing a bass guitar to work with the boomerang strap system. I mean, the Omni bass is the same scale as a bass guitar, but it's got the highly radiused fingerboard. It's set up to be plucked and bowed. So what I want to do is make a model that's strictly for plucking, you know, which has, you know, the typical radius of a bass guitar, which really is a bass guitar. So that's a project I'm working on. Another thing that's been occupying me a lot lately is the new tremolo for the guitar that we're going to be coming out with here at NS Design before too long, and so that's been a big challenge. I'd say it's a lot of fun, but it's been a big challenge too. So I'm happy to say that I've pretty much got that figured out, and I'm in the final stages of putting a prototype together. And there's always something else coming up. I love to do new things, and so I don't plan to stop doing that. Okay, what are your future plans? I guess I kind of covered that. You know, I want to keep my business thriving and give myself the opportunity to develop new and exciting instruments for musicians to enjoy and to make music with that will have meaning for them and for their audience. So that's what it's really all about. I just want to keep doing it. And the last question here is there anything else you would like to share that we have not included? I guess the only thing I would really want to add to all this is just to say how lucky I am to have found my way to making musical instruments. For me, musical instruments are kind of like a peace pipe or something like that. They're the antithesis of bombs and warfare. They are tools that people can use to connect with each other and to make our lives better. So this is just been a huge opportunity, and I'm so grateful that I have had a chance to make a career out of making musical instruments. So thank you for those who have managed to make it all the way through this discussion, and take care.